I would now like to introduce our penultimate speaker, that's Sara Flounders. Most of you know her. She's a long-standing political activist and author based in New York City. She's a contributing editor to the Workers' World newspaper, a very important source of information from a left perspective and analysis from a left perspective. And she's leader of the United National Antiwar Coalition, the International Action Center, and the SanctionsKill Campaign. She's the co-author and editor of numerous books, including Capitalism on a Ventilator, The Impact of COVID-19 in China and the US, which she co-authored with Lee SiuHin, and more recently, Sanctions, the wrecking ball in a global economy. So Sara, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Radhika. And it is such an honor to participate in this discussion. Thank you, Carlos Martinez, for our real contribution to the political level of discussion among Marxists, and for over 1,000 footnotes to back up every point you make. Now, there have been great reviews because this book is such a valuable resource. In a Workers' World review of The East is Still Red, Carlos's book is defined as a necessary read. The book is a contribution to the discussion regarding the class character of the People's Republic of China. In whose interests does the People's Republic of China operate? In the interests of the people of China, yes, of course. But it impacts on the global working class. So it's in our class interests everywhere to defend China from the aggressive ideological attack, from the economic attack and the sanctions, and now on the military encirclement, all led by US imperialism. Carlos reminds us of President Obama's famous quote in describing the pivot to Asia. It is to preserve US hegemony. We have to make sure that America writes the rules of the global economy, or China will. Now, what does the US and British imperialism and the G7 imperialist countries fear? China's state-owned enterprises, its publicly owned banks, are the largest source of profit. Also, there's regulation on the private businesses. But the Chinese state and the Chinese Communist Party directs the economy. And capitalists from around the world, they can invest, but they can't just pull their equipment out and leave. China owns it, and Chinese staff must be trained to operate it. Now, that's what the imperialists consider property theft. They want to control every investment. China does not need the extraction of profit as privately owned banks and industries do. For imperialism, this is a most essential requirement. It's their lifeblood. They are dependent on extracting, on maximizing profit. So China is a defining point for left forces globally, but especially in the United States today, because it's the US war machine that is directly targeting China. The entire US productive capacity is focused now on how to disrupt China's supply chain, even if it dislocates US production and wreaks havoc on a global scale. This is a new Cold War and a real danger of it going much further. There's US aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines going through the Straits of Taiwan. There's constant overflights in the South China Sea. These are daily provocations. And all of this is justified with the most unrelenting media campaign not seen in decades. A media propaganda campaign so insidious, so all-pervasive in every form of media, culture, sports, and openly funded by the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, really a CIA front. Now, I've had two incredible opportunities to visit the People's Republic of China, and in particular, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which is a center of the US atrocity myths. the claims of slave labor. We found agriculture to be entirely mechanized: tractors, planters, drones, acres of plastic-covered greenhouses. It's important to note that there's not one Islamic or Arab country that has backed up the US claims on Xinjiang. And they instead have organized major fact-finding delegations to Xinjiang. The false claims come entirely from the G7 countries by actual organizations they have created and then they publicize. But whether you visited China or not, it's essential for left and progressive forces to be clear on what we defend in China and what does Wall Street want to destroy in China. Now, we're in the midst of organizing a discussion in a number of US cities on this very topic. And it's why The East is Still Red is such a necessary read, because we have to arm ourselves with political arguments. We need to be aware it's not an abstract topic. It's a living challenge in the class struggle today. We don't get to choose our battles. The US imperialist ruling class has pushed the topic of China to the top of our agenda. That's where it's got to be. It's without dispute, of course, even conceded in the US media, that China has pulled hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and into a stable and secure life. It's the greatest anti-poverty achievement in history. And it's something that no capitalist country has successfully achieved. So the big question for those who consider themselves to be on the side of socialist revolution is, what's the class character of People's China? We need to answer all the vicious twists and ugly distortions and crude US propaganda. And we also need to answer the polite academics and intellectuals who want to convince working class organizers that there's nothing worth defending in China, that it's no different than the US. We should just limit our attention to immediate bread and butter struggles. In the class struggle, you have to take on all the major issues. Where do you stand? Which side are you on? Isn't that always the essential question? So, as the title implies, Carlos makes a powerful case that China is still a socialist country and that anti-imperialists worldwide should step forward and defend People's China against the US and world imperialism. Consider, if imperialism prevailed and is able to halt China's development, this would be a historic defeat, not only for workers and peasants of China, it would have a global impact. The working class in China is actually larger than the working class of all the G7 countries combined, including the US. The collapse of the Soviet Union was a terrible setback for the working class struggle globally, in Africa, in Asia, here in the US and Europe. The capitalist class gained a huge advantage and set out to recolonize whole parts of the world where gains had been made. Eastern Europe was reverted to its former almost subcolonial status. In Africa, throughout the Arab world, US imperialism set out to literally rip apart national regimes and governments. Now, our task is to win over the working class right here, and in Britain and in Canada and throughout Europe, to really, so that people understand what's at stake. No imperialist war is in our class interests. Imperialist wars are for the immediate profit of a small handful of corporate giants. We pay, they benefit. But in order to defend China against unrelenting corporate propaganda, the left needs to consciously organize to stop imperialist wars, and we need material to answer the attacks. And so every page of Carlos's book is a concrete fact to answer the corporate media. I want to give one example. There's 1,000 of them, but how about the charge that China is creating a debt trap for African countries? It's the new imperialist power stealing Africa's resources. How often have we heard that? Now, Carlos quotes the 2022 Debt Justice Report that African governments owe 3 times more debt to the Western banks than China, and that in truth, only 12% of Africa's external debt is owed to Chinese lenders. China's interest rates are 1/2 those of Western loans. And Carlos always gives the footnotes. I go back and read them because, gee, there's a whole article explaining so much of this, sometimes a point he makes in passing. Or that China has built more infrastructure in Africa in 2 decades than the West has in centuries. And that means railroads and ports and water filtration plants and power stations. China offers more scholarships to Africa and to African students than all of the Western scholarships combined. So these are the facts that it's always so good to have. China is still a socialist country, and it has much to teach the world movement. There's an arrogance that says, oh, nothing to be learned from China. There is an incredible amount. So we need to defend it against the real imperialist oppressors. And in concluding, I'll say that among those who are for socialism, how to understand China and really step forward to defend China is the immediate challenge. All the most powerful imperialist forces are pulling the other way. Carlos's book is a real primer with basic arguments. 600 million workers in China, larger than the working class of the entire G7 imperialist countries, and nearly 100 million Communist Party members are defending socialist property rights. So even though a capitalist class has grown and there's inequality in wealth, the sheer size of the growing Chinese working class and the Communist Party of China, politically conscious, highly organized, that is a significant, historic, world-changing development. That China's economy weathered the 2008 capitalist crisis that brought capitalist finances to the brink of collapse is proof that it's not the billionaires who are driving decisions in China. The capitalists of the West were not saved in China, and the Chinese capitalists were not saved or bailed out. State resources went to the biggest infrastructure building programs in China's history. And millions of Chinese workers who were suddenly laid off overnight when the capitalist firms globally collapsed were immediately hired into Chinese programs. So this is socialism.
Wrap up, Sarah. Yeah.
Yep, this is the ending.
Okay.
This is socialism with Chinese characteristics, and Carlos convinces the reader to resolutely oppose the new Cold War on China. It's a service to the worldwide movement for socialism. Let's remember that essential distinction: US bombs, China builds. Our task is to defend people's China. And thank you for this program, which helps do that.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.